Hi, Writing 122 students. This is Melissa Vargas, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Plato's The Allegory of the Cave, the first difficult reading that we did. So I know this is a struggle, so I appreciate all of you taking the time to try to understand it. And keep in mind that, we don't always understand a reading the first time we read it. It can be a challenge, but I appreciate you trying to find where you see some meaning. So first of all, I just want to scroll down and talk about this allegory. So Plato describes these men in the cave looking at shadows, not seeing true objects, and so on. And that's meant not to be taken literally, but to be representative of how people live. And he was specifically talking about people of his time, but we could apply this to today as well. So the idea is that instead of being exposed to truth and learning real knowledge, which is the knowledge of the philosopher according to Plato, represented in Socrates here, that we are often being exposed to untruths and frivolous things. And so the people in the cave are described as being obsessed with knowledge that isn't really meaningful. And so what Plato is saying is that philosophy can take someone out of that cave, out of that ignorance, and lead them to this process of becoming more educated in philosophy and being educated finally in the good or the real truth. And you could think of that as God. Some people have interpreted it that way. Other people just see it as a source of good that's really unknown. So, you can think about that in several ways. So, Plato tells us what this all means in this paragraph on page 5. So, if you're looking for a paragraph to go back to really understand this, this is where he explains himself that the prison house is the world of sight, the light of the fire is the sun, and so on. And so he explains here that he's describing this enlightenment, this journey towards knowledge of the good. Okay. So Plato describes this and says that people can become enlightened, can become knowledgeable of philosophy and of the good. And then he talks about what should then happen. And so he describes that this process can lead someone to dwell in this knowledge and dwell in philosophy and never go back into the cave. But he says that actually it's their responsibility to go back and to try to educate others and pull them into enlightenment. And so that's what he's describing here after that. Um, that um, that of course they have this process and that they need guides because this is where he gets into the discussion of how learning works and says that unlike some teachers of the time that thought that knowledge had to be put into students, he is seeing educators as a guide, and specifically philosophers as a guide, as people who can help their students see the knowledge that they're capable of learning. So it's more being a guide than someone who just fills someone up with knowledge. And so there's this great quote on page 6. Our argument shows that the power and capacity of learning exist in the soul already. So it's recognizing individuals for their capacity to learn. And this is something that is important not just for philosophy, but for education, a different way of thinking about how students learn. Okay, going down, um, we get to the political implications of this argument. And so what he says here is that, and this is on page 6, right? 7, actually. So he says, neither the uneducated and uninformed of the truth, nor yet those who never make an end of their education. So neither those who are in the cave and focused on things that don't really matter and awards that don't matter, nor those who become enlightened but stay within the realm of philosophy and never go back. will be able ministers of state. Not the former, because they have no single aim of duty, which is the rule of all their actions. So they are just gaining those rewards for themselves. It's all about them, private as well as public, nor the latter, because they will not act at all except upon compulsion, fancying that they are already dwelling apart in the island of the blessed. So that's those philosophers who just stay separate from the people. So neither of those would be good leaders, according to Plato. So instead, he says, the business of us who are the founders of the state will be to compel the best minds to attain that knowledge which we have already shown to be the greatest of all. They must continue to ascend until they arrive at the good. But when they have ascended and seen enough, we must not allow them to do as they do now, which is to remain separate. And so he says, going on, I mean that they remain in the upper world, but this must not be allowed. They must be made to descend again among the prisoners in the cave and partake of their labors and honors, whether they are worth having or not. And so what he's saying is that they have to go back and be part of the people and be leaders. And he ends with this point on page 8 that shows the true political implications here. There lies the point. You must contrive for your future rulers another and a better life than that of a ruler, and then you may have a well-ordered state. For only in the state which offers this will they rule who are truly rich, not in silver and gold, but in virtue and wisdom, which are the true blessings of life. Whereas if they go to the administration of public affairs, poor and hungering after their own private advantage, thinking that hence they are to snatch the chief good, order there can never be, for they will be fighting about the office, and the civil and domestic broils which thus arise will be the ruin of the rulers themselves and of the whole state. So what he's describing here is that people who want to rule and who are bred for it, so go into life pursuing this power of the ruler, will be focused on the benefit to themselves, and will fight amongst each other for the spoils of politics. And he says that this will ruin them and the whole state, so it has a negative impact on everyone. And so what he's saying is that instead, that these philosophers who achieve knowledge of the good, of the true source of knowledge and philosophy, they won't really want to rule, but they'll know it's their responsibility. And because they will be serving the people, they will not have the same flaws that these other rulers have had. They'll be truly seeking out what's best for everyone, and be good leaders. So, of course, Plato's being very idealistic here. He's assuming that anyone can achieve knowledge of the good and be this perfect leader. Whereas we know, of course, people are flawed and they might have good intentions, but not always live up to them. And of course, we know that those who do gain power are often the ones who Plato would have described as being in the cave and very good at earning those rewards that are frivolous and rather than true knowledge of philosophy. Another issue with this is, of course, Plato has his specific idea of what it means to be educated, to have knowledge of the good, and other people might have different opinions on that. And so he really doesn't do a good job of addressing opposing views. Notice that his, uh, presenting this as Socrates' ideas, which they were, he has this student of Socrates responding, but he's really just a yes man. He doesn't really challenge Socrates within the dialogue or add to the dialogue in any way. And so this is really not a good example of addressing opposing views. A very good example, though, of even though it's difficult because it's translated and it's old, there being a claim, being reasoning, using the allegory to build up to that, providing some evidence, of course, without evidence that would be acceptable to those with opposing views. It's not going to be that strong with logos. But using Socrates to build ethos and credibility, it is well written. appealing to pathos, that sense of not wanting to be ignorant, wanting to be knowledgeable of the truth. Could have some emotional appeal though. And then, of course, Kairos. This was relevant at the time because of debates about democracy and if it was working for the people or if it was just allowing some people to gain power over others under the disguise of democracy. And of course, this was especially significant when democracy was meant to apply only to certain people, those in that time that were men, landowners, privileged, rather than everyone in the republic. So Plato's making these points about what the future should hold for government in that republic that he imagines. So hopefully this helps you understand this a little bit better. If you're thinking about using this reading for your definition argument, you might be thinking about what it means to be free in terms of less less as far as government goes and more about personal freedom and being enlightened and having knowledge. That might be the approach you want to take with this. But you might have some other ideas as well. So you don't have to use this for your definition argument, but if it spoke to you, think about how you might use it. Okay. Don't forget that you can ask questions, though, if you still have any after listening to this. You can email them to me or ask them in the questions thread.